Welcome to the Association's Futures Podcast, brought to you by Association Activision. We ask you to join us to discuss the future of the Association's community. How can we build and focus on the many futures we will see during these disruptive times? Let's get started with today's guest.
Well, good afternoon, friends. I'm Michael Butera, your host for Association Futures Podcast. And today's guest is Eileen Johnson, a partner at the Whiteford Law Firm and co-chair of their Association Nonprofit and Political Organizations section. As we begin this podcast, we must remember that Eileen is not going to be providing legal advice in this setting. If you're looking for formal legal advice, check with your own general counsel or give Eileen a call after the podcast. Now, Eileen has over 30 years of experience serving as general counsel to tax-exempt organizations. Her practice focuses on the full range of legal challenges her clients face, including tax, governance, transactions, employment, intellectual property, and fundraising. Her counsel has been informed by 20 years of experience as in-house counsel for the National Wildlife Federation. She is a certified association executive from ASAE, and Eileen is a frequent speaker and author on legal and governance issues that impact tax-exempt organizations. She is a member of ASAE's Finance and Business Operations Professional Advisory Council, a past member of ASAE's Legal Advisory Council and Innovations Grant Program Committee, past chair of the ASAE's Legal Section Council, and past chair of the Virginia State Bar's Corporate Counsel Section. She has held numerous volunteer positions with ASAE and other associations, nonprofit executives. Eileen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Michael. That sounded like so impressive.
It is impressive. It is impressive. And I so that we're transparent here, I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with Eileen, and I know of her great talent and expertise. So Eileen, let's get into this. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into association work and the role that you played at ASAE and how that influences your work with the association community.
Wow, that's a big order. So like many people in the association world, I fell into it. I was married, I still am married, to a Marine, and we were moving around quite a bit for his assignments and got back to the DC metro area, answered a job at the Washington Post to be in-house counsel at the National Wildlife Federation, which, while it's not a trade or professional association, it is a membership organization, had about 60,000 members, had a state affiliate program, just like many associations do. We had a direct mail campaign, online campaign, all sorts of activities, sold merchandise, had, conservation programs. We had offices in 7 states, which then grew to 13 states. So I was dealing with remote employees. I had a very small in-house staff and a very small budget for legal work. So I joined ASAE because at that time they had a 2-day association law conference, which was just amazing for someone who felt like they were all by themselves trying to practice in-house. So I joined and would attend that regularly every year. I eventually at one point actually chaired the committee that did that, but it's now gone by the wayside. So I really enjoyed that. And then after being there for a while and doing all the issues that we dealt with, the new membership program was the one you had 5 years ago under a different, vice president membership, one of those things. Then was recruited by Whiteford, joined the firm to start up an associations practice. We had one person at the time doing nonprofit work, and he was operating by himself and wanted someone to help, particularly with the association community in the DC metro area. So joined up. I started going to all sorts of ACA events in the area, including at the time GSAE, and formed with a bunch of other people, consultants. We formed sort of like our own little consultants group because there wasn't any official home for consultants at ASAE at the time. We made enough trouble that John Graham formed the Association Consultants Council, and I was one of the original founding members of that. I was on that for 3 years and very proud of the work that we did for consultants within the association community. Many of them, like me, are CAEs. So we've been association executives, have just gone into consulting versus a day job in an association. So that was my first official ASE job, I guess you'd say, as a volunteer. Joined the Legal Section Council. I was on that for 3 years, left, and was on another volunteer group. I actually was on FBOS for 1 year, and then it sort of disbanded because there was lack of leadership at the time. I was asked to go back on the Legal Section Council just so that I could be chair when it was time. So I did that. See, what did I do after that? At that point, we were doing a lot of articles and speaking for ASAE. So I did that and spoke at a number of annual meetings, great ideas. I used to love great ideas. That was such a great place to meet fellow association execs in a small sort of environment, very intimate, everybody in one hotel. Thought that was great. And took a little time off from the official council work to work on the Innovation Grants Program. And was on that committee for a number of years. Our firm followed, I think it was SunTrust Bank, as a second sponsor of that program at a $10,000 a year commitment. So I was on the committee, the selection committee. There were some great innovation projects. Not all of them were award winners, but there were just some great projects that we saw that were implemented in the association community. So all of that helps to inform the work that I do with my association clients. As you just mentioned, I've been in-house. I've dealt with board meetings as staff member. I've dealt with difficult rifts of, when the budget's down. I've dealt with, chapters that are complaining about things, bylaws changes, all that. I did that in-house. And then these various volunteer roles I have with ASAE, I'm keeping up to date with what's going on from what I hear from other people. So I'm not just working, by myself here. So it's been very helpful and informative as I work with my clients. I can say, I heard the other day, such and such is having a problem without naming names. I heard there's another, trade association having this issue with this new state law or whatever it would be. So.
Well, you just mentioned one of my favorite issues, and that is bylaws. I'm so shocked by the length of bylaws for some organizations, where every policy under the sun is in there. And now this is my opinion. I'm not a lawyer. Where every policy is there instead of just, a good basic framework for ensuring the governance of the organization. Do you, in your practice, what do you see in terms of bylaw and where we're headed in the new century here as we reconfigure our organizations for the future?
That's a great question. I have seen very few great bylaws. I've seen some good ones. The worst I saw, it was over 300 pages. And it wasn't just policies and procedures. Instead of republishing bylaws, like if, say, the board size was 15 and they amended it to make it 25, they kept both of them in there and then said, disregard page, whatever it is, section this, and use this. It was such a complete mess. Nobody could understand how to implement it. And they have been doing it that way for like over 70 years. They were not going to change. I did not convince them to change. It was horrible. And they had a lot of governance issues because of that. When I'm forming a new corporation, I have, and I do in 4 different states. So I've got different variations depending on which state I'm practicing in. But I've got the short version and I've got the one I actually like better. But sometimes short is too short because people have to recall that whatever state you're incorporated in, considering this is a US audience, right? Your state corporation code will specify certain provisions, like the notice you have to give members for an annual meeting. So a lot of statutes will say not longer than and no less than a certain time period, like no less than 10 days, no longer than 60 days for the notice of the annual meeting. So if you just mix something up and you don't see what's in your state corporation code, your bylaws are not in compliance and someone could easily challenge the results of an election, right? So it's very important to have those in there. So if you got really short bylaws, they won't know that there's something else that overlays that. It's like your state corporation code, your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, your policies, your procedures, they all sort of are at a chain of command, and the state corporation code takes over. So that can be challenging because a lot of people like short bylaws, no more than 3 pages. It's like, okay, we can do that. We can just say this, not have a whole lot in there, but you're going to have to remember that when you want to do anything, you got to go back and check your corporation code. And when you explain that, they're like, oh, it's too much of pain. So then they agree to go with a little bit longer bylaws. When I see bylaws, and a lot of organizations right now are going through, I wouldn't say governance changes. There's movements. There have been movements the last 15 years or so to smaller boards. There are organizations that are struggling with chapters that can't meet minimum requirements in terms of member size to be a chapter. So they're looking at, do we combine chapters and other things? So, in going through all of that, we've been seeing a lot of bylaws, just doing bylaws reviews. And, we always look to see, do they comply with state law? Are there internal inconsistencies? One article, this section, this says one thing, and then something else later on says something different. And then we look at, do they make sense? Do they work the way the board wants to operate? Sometimes they'll say, it says that you did this, you've got these committees. Do you really? Oh, haven't had those in years. It's like, okay, get them out of your bylaws. You probably shouldn't have any committees except the executive committee in your bylaws. You don't need them in your bylaws. So there are ways to have tailored bylaws that work for an organization. I mean, definitely if the organization hasn't reviewed them in a few years, it's worth looking at them. There have been changes, not as many changes in state corporation law as there have been in employment laws, which is like an ever-changing area these days. But with the corporation codes, like during COVID, a lot of organizations moved to virtual meetings, including virtual voting, and their state law doesn't allow that. And they didn't think about that. We've got clients that we work with that, say they're in one state that doesn't allow virtual voting. There's usually ways to do it, like you use proxy votes. There's ways to kind of get around it, but you have to go through those hoops. Again, another long answer to the question you asked.
It's interesting because, in this more disruptive world that we now live in, and the advent of more virtual associations, it's likely that, for example, their employees are in multiple states, where at one time, you could pretty much say all of our employees are in the District of Columbia or Maryland or, Chicago or wherever they happen to be. I'm wondering if that is an issue that associations have to take more care and understanding when they employ individuals in multiple jurisdictions, meaning multiple states.
For sure. And it's not just the states, it's the employee that wants to move to Costa Rica or to London or somewhere else. We're seeing some of that started during COVID. It was temporary. They were going to come back. So maybe the association didn't change their employee handbook, but now people are just moving remotely. And, for what's considered to be a more permanent relocation, the handbook that has one size fits all employment policies most likely doesn't work when you've got employees in multiple jurisdictions. Even things as simple as required leave. Some states say you've got to give employees paid time off for voting. Other states don't. Some states say you have to allow employees to take time off to visit with their child's school if their school's under a disciplinary action. I think California's got that rule. Other states don't have that. There's a lot of rules about mandatory sick leave, mandatory parental leave, not just at the state, but sometimes the local level. And if you haven't been keeping up with that and keeping your employee policies and handbook up with that, you could get in trouble with an employee filing a claim against the association. It gets worse when they move out of country, because then you're totally dealing with different countries' employment laws. Some countries require employees to actually have written contracts. Depending if you're in a country in Europe, there might be all sorts of required, I want to call them social benefits, that you don't necessarily get in the United States that are required for employees in those jurisdictions. So you've got, just the employment area is just really fraught with potential issues when you have remote employees. Then you get sort of in the corporate issues, because some states will say, one employee in the state, that's fine, we don't worry about it. You get 2 or 3 in the state, suddenly you have to register to do business in that state. which means another corporate filing you've got to keep up on an annual basis. You got to get a registered agent, and then you have to then comply with whatever that state has. And if you are, tax exempt, you have to apply for tax exemption, or else they're going to try to tax your income in that state. So it's an additional process, and just can be a bit of a headache when you keep adding. One or two states are probably manageable. You get employees in 15 different states. It can be very cumbersome to manage.
It's interesting you mentioned the multiple state thing and the potential of being outside the United States. One of the issues that always comes up in the work I see is this issue of intellectual property and cybersecurity issues, where even here in the States, my understanding, which is limited, is that some states have much stricter rules about privacy than other states do. And I suspect that's an issue depending upon where associations have their members or their staff. Is that the kind of issue that's also becoming more and more complex in the new century?
It certainly is. This all started with the European Union, and then Canada, and then California. And now I think there's 10 or 12 states, including Virginia and Maryland, which have laws with respect to data that you keep. And some of them are on the basis of opt-in. You can't keep people's data unless they opt in. They tell you you have permission to use it. And there's only certain data you're allowed to keep depending upon the law. There have been rules on the books for, 10, 15, 20 years about data breaches and having to notify people when you have a data breach if their information has been compromised. We all get those letters in the mail from our banks, our credit card companies, whatever, hospitals, your data's been breached, 1 year free monitoring kind of thing. But from the association perspective, it can be it's going to be a real issue. You're trying to keep your membership, and for the purposes of these data laws, it's where the person whose data you're accessing lives. So if you are an association active in all 50 states, you've got to comply with all those laws. There is not a unified national law. So you're looking at the complexity of state laws, which might have different requirements. Something that might be defined as personal data in one state is not in another state. So it gets very difficult to manage what you're collecting. We've been working with a number of associations lately, reviewing their privacy policies and all that. And some of the data they're collecting is like, why are you collecting this? And you shouldn't be collecting data unless there is a business need for it. Just because you're curious whether your members are Democrats, Republicans, or independents, if you don't need that data, don't collect it. If you're curious about what their religion is, there's not a business reason why you need it, don't collect that data. The more data you collect, the more likely you are that you're going to violate one of these laws.
Also on this issue of multiple state kind of issues, there's always been, and I assume you see some of this, the issue of how you fundraise in certain states, how you collect money. Again, I don't know the details, but I understand that if you're in multiple locations, if your members are in multiple locations, there may be different rules about how and whether or not you have to register to actually collect money in various different states.
That's true. If you're doing fundraising, this is 501c3 fundraising, charitable fundraising. Charitable solicitation is the legal term for it. We call it just fundraising. 41 states, including DC, regulate that. They have requirements about registration. You've got to do initial registration. You have to do an annual report. You have to submit a copy of your 990 with them, along with, in many states, they use the Unified Registration Statement, URS. But rather than taking the standard form that a number of states have agreed to use, they take that and then they slap their own form on top of it. So it can be very complex to handle as an organization that's fundraising, which is why there's a proliferation of fundraisers that help with this, or fundraising counsel. But even that, yesterday we looked at a contract for an organization that was doing fundraising nationwide and working with professional fundraising counsel to help them, craft their campaign message and all that. And we found even then we checked out which states required certain language to be in the contract with the fundraiser. It gets down to that specific level. Then there's language you have to use at the point of solicitation. Some states have requirements. You've seen those if you get any sort of direct mail. There's that little piece of paper in the back that's got this tiny little print. You've seen those. That's required by those states. You have to have nobody ever reads them, but it's required to have that there. And then if you're doing a commercial co-venture, what's often called cause marketing, you having an organization is letting its logo or its name be used on a product. A good example, U.S. Olympic Committee. You'll see their brand on all sorts of things now because it's Olympics start this week. And you'll see that. And whenever there's a point of sale, like buy this and we'll make a donation to the U.S. Olympic Committee, that's a commercial co-venture. You're inducing a customer to make a purchase because there's a contribution attached to it. There's required disclosure, and it's 14 or 15 states, as to what you have to say at the point of sale, either a dollar amount or a percentage of the proceeds that's going to be actually donated to the charity. So it can get really complex.
It would be unfair if I didn't tell people that we have worked together in the past. And one of the things I always liked about your work and other members of your firm that have been assisting is on governance relationships. That is how the board really operates and its relationship with its chief executive as just 2 points. And one of the things I've noticed is there are all kinds of legal requirements, but one of the things I've really liked in working with you and your firm has been what I call the common sense approach. Now, what I mean by that is you're not going to let anybody violate the law, but you are going to explain to them that we're all humans and we do crazy things from time to time. And directors, this is a serious problem, particularly conflict of interest. They're not very well handled as a rule and alike. And I'm wondering, what you see in the governance area that associations have to really be careful about, again, as we transition to a new economic, political, and social environment that the new century has brought us.
I would tie with governance codes of conduct. We're seeing codes of conduct, I would say the last 5 years or 8 years, whatever, more exploding. Required codes of conduct for conferences, codes of conduct for members, codes of ethics, code of conduct, they're different terminologies. For board members, it's usually code of conduct. It could be expectations. I've seen some that are very easy to checklist form. It's simple, like read the board materials before you show up at the meeting, attend the meeting. It's really basic expectations of a board member. Some are much more complex and with great detail in terms of, any statement you put on social media, make sure you say it's on behalf of yourself and not on behalf of the association. Just trying to keep associations out of the political fray or the discourse, if you want to call it. So we've seen some of that. In terms of the board governance itself, there's still a need, there's like an ongoing need for training. And it's not just this is the association, this is what we do, you're a board member, thank you for your service, but more detailed training about the role of the board working with staff, that balance of power between what's in the board's purview, what's in the staff's purview, where do those lines intersect, sort of in that Venn diagram. When do you work together? The role of the board working with staff. Do you have to work through the CEO, executive director, or are they free to call directly with staff? That can get complicated. Seeing complications with board members who are on the national board, but they're also still on their state affiliate board. And then you get issues that come up when there's an issue, like, say, changing the due split between the national and the state affiliate, and that person is wearing two hats, where they want more money at the national level, they don't want to pay it, at the local level. So, those issues always happen. But then there's more that could be done with board training, particularly learning more about the association business. Particularly associations, people come on the board, they're all pretty much from the same profession or the same general interest. And they all come with that sort of, they know that really well. You know, if it's the trucking industry, they know trucking really well. They don't necessarily know associations. What's an association? What's it really do, like behind the curtains? Things that, you know, it's amazing because somebody will be like, finally get on the board, and they've like, I've been in an association for 20 years. They get on the board meeting, and after their first board meeting, they're like, I had no clue what was going on. I had no idea we had a membership program. Even though I paid dues, had no idea we did that. I had no idea what programs we had. I had no idea we did lobbying. And partly you think like, where have you been? Because you said you've been a member for 20 years. But then it's just the sort of behind the scenes, all the different staff jobs, the consultants that work with the associations to help them, implement activities beyond what the staff and the volunteers can do. It's just, it's a business, and a lot of boards just don't see it that way.
Yeah. You know, there's in the private sector, many boards are compensated. The board director is compensated. That's unusual, maybe even non-existent in the tax-exempt sector. I assume that would create some new issues that would have to be looked at from a legal perspective as well, because there now are advocates that for association boards receiving some form of compensation other than reimbursement, which I think is pretty common.
Yeah, it's not disallowed in the nonprofit world. We work with a number of organizations where the board is compensated. It is a common practice with private foundations. They have been paying, it's minimal, maybe $5,000-$10,000 per, board member per year, but it's common for them to receive compensation. We're seeing more, not in the association space, but more in the sort of the C3 space, universities, hospitals, other organizations compensating their board members, partly because they need to do that to attract good talent to their boards. These are, in some cases, billion-dollar businesses, if you think about it, right? It's not just which alumni gave the most money. It's who else can they have on the board to help with some of the issues they're dealing with. If you think of like what an association is doing, just magnify that. If you've got one association in one office, well, think about, say, a university that's got 6 different campuses, some overseas. You might want to get different people on your board, so you can be paying them. Some organizations do it because they really work their board members as if they're the C-level staff. They might have an executive director and 1 or 2 staff, but then their board members are acting as the CFO, the COO, the director of philanthropy or whatever it is. So we're seeing more of that actually in I'll call it the nonprofit sector versus the association sector. Yeah. I would not be opposed to it if that's what you need to do to get people. The problem is the association community is based on, I'm a member, I pay my dues, I work my way up, often from a state association to the national association. And that's how the volunteer chain of just homegrown volunteers, right? Whereas other organizations, they don't have that broad, they may not have any members. And so they're recruiting from a different base.
Yeah, in the work I've been doing with boards, I have been recommending that they look at getting what I call outside directors, meaning people that are not of the particular discipline or industry that have some expertise. They may be an accountant, it could be a lawyer, they could be a specialist in communications or something like that. Although many bylaws prohibit that, you have to be a member in order to be allowed to be on the board. So, but do you have any thoughts about outside directors? Is that
sorry to cut you off. I agree with that. It is a hard sell. Not just we have to amend the bylaws and that requires the membership to prove it, and it's got 2/3, blah, blah, blah. But some people get insulted when you say to them what I consider just be a fact. You are all in the same profession. You all have the same view. And some professions are so small, they all went to school together. Or if they didn't, they saw each other at their postdoc or whatever kind of thing, so it's very small and they all have this certain view. And it's like you're missing other views. Some associations do deal with that by having outside directors. they might call it like a public director or a consumer director or something like that. One or two, and sometimes they don't let them vote. So they're just there to like advise the board and don't get to vote. But I think there are certain skill sets that may be missing from a board. And you can do a board skill set analysis and see what's missing and then decide how do we get that. And you can get that by recruiting people within the association that have that skill, by adding that skill to somebody who says, I don't know anything about accounting, but I'll take a night class just so I can understand it. Or you go beyond the association membership.
Well, I can't thank you enough for joining me here today. And before we close out, if someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to reach you or the firm, Eileen?
Well, probably easiest is the internet. So our website is whitefordlaw.com. Or you can use my phone number is 703-280-9271.
Why don't you repeat that a little slower for the audience?
Okay, the website is whitefordlaw.com, and my phone number is 703-280-9271.
Eileen, thank you so very much for joining me today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your insights and your knowledge about the association community. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Michael. I always enjoy talking with you.
So, folks, Association Futures is a forward-thinking podcast that examines the future of the association community. Our mission is to help you and your organization navigate the ever-evolving landscape by anticipating trends, avoiding short-sighted decisions, and ensuring long-term success. I hope you'll tune in again to gain insights, foresight, and actionable strategies for your association's journey. Thanks, friends. Hope to see you again, and have a great day.